Good day. Today's daf is daf Pei Chet in Masechet Menachot. We are at the Gemara near the bottom, 4 lines up from the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Bet. And what we just saw was the Mishnah that reviewed the different wet measurement, the liquid measurement utensils in the Beis Hamikdash. And we saw that there were three different opinions in our Mishnah. Opinion number one was that there were 7 different measuring utensils: a hin, a half hin, a third of a hin, and a quarter of a hin. And those measure 12 log, 6 log, 4 log, and 3 log. Then there was a log, a half log, and a quarter log. And Rabbi Eliezer said there weren't 7 measurement utensils. There was one, and it just had 7 markings on it to show different measurements. And then Rabbi Shimon says there were 7, but take away the large hints one because that wasn't used at all. But rather there was one that was a log and a half. And so as a result, and so that was basically an eighth of a hin, which is a log and a half. And so as a result, that was the 7th measuring. And so now our brisa, the Mishnah Gemara cites a brisa that really gives us the details of these measuring cups and provides the sources for how we know. So Tana Rabbanan, Sheva Midah Shel Lach Hayu B'Mikdash. There were 7 kinds of measuring utensils in the Beis Hamikdash, and these really it's sizes. There may have been multiple ones of each size, but there were 7 different sizes. Revius. Now we're going from the smallest to the largest. Log. Revius log. Excuse me. A quarter of a log. A chatzi log. The log. And then you uravias hahin, a quarter of a hin, or shlishis hahin, a third of a hin, v'chatzi hin b'hin. And so again, 7 different utensils, 3 that we reference in connection with the log, and that are a log or smaller, and 4 that are the difference, that are somewhere between a log and a hin. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Meir says, and here he's going to say the exact same 7, but give it in the opposite order. And we're going to explain at the end of this brisa, after the brisa, we'll explain what's the difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Hin, v'chatzi hin, u'shlishisa hin, u'revi'isa hin. Log, v'chatzi log, u'revi'is log. So again, the same 7, just in the reverse order. Rabbi Shimon says, Lo hayasham hin. Just like he said in our Mishnah, he says now, there was not a hin measurement at all, because after all, what would the hin do as we turn to Peichet Amud Aleph? As mi avi tachtav. So what should I bring in its place? Meaning I want to have 7 still. Elamidi yiserish a logo mechta hayasasham. There was a log and a half that was there. Shabo hayu moded lechavite kohen gadol, because you would use that in order to measure the oil for the chavitin of the kohen gadol. Logo mechza baboker, there would be 1.5 in the morning. The logo mechza ben harbaim, and 1.5 in the afternoon. Amrlo chatzi log haisasham. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Shimon, "Why do you need a 1.5? We have a half. The efshar l'shar b'chatzi log. You can measure out 1.5 log using a half log measuring. You'd measure 3 times a half, that's 1.5. Amar lahem, af l'divrechem, chatzi log lo yaseh. Revius haisasham. Well, why bother with the chatzi log at all? Use the revius. You can use 2 revius for a chatzi log. You use 6 revius for a log and a half. The efshar l'shar b'revius. You could measure everything with a revius a log. Rather, this is the rule that for how we had utensils in the mikdash, that everything had its own measurement. And you don't use the wrong measurement. Okay? And so now we go back and we ask the question, well, my Ika bein Rebbe, we'll skip the parenthetical. So my Ika bein Rebbe Meir le Rebbe Yehuda. What's the difference? Rebbe Meir and Rebbe Yehuda offered the same 7 vessels, just differing in the order. One went from largest to smallest, and one went from smallest to largest. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan said the following: Beirutze midos ika benaihu. The Beirutze is what's the difference between them. Now, Beirutze, it's not exactly clear. The easiest interpretation for me is to understand it, and based on the viscosity or the way that the liquid can pool over the rim. That if you have a liquid, given the fact that it's a solid on some level, it's or more solid than a gas. It has the ability to sort of go over the edge of the rim without spilling out the on the side. If you take a look at your, Kiddush cup on Shabbos morning, you'll see that often that you can actually get it to be above the rim. I wouldn't recommend it because then you're going to spill. But in any event, the bottom line is that the question is that stuff that goes over the rim, is that considered sanctified or not? So kasavar beirutze amidos niskadshu. So lamanda, I'm sorry. So beirutze amidos ikabenayut. So that the stuff that's over the rim, that's where they disagree. Lamanda amar mimata lamala, the one who goes from the smallest to the largest, meaning Rabbi Yehuda kasavar beirutze amidos niskadshu. He would say that he began with the log and then went up to the hin. So he would say that that additional amount is considered kodesh. And why would it? Because what you could do is if you have a larger vessel and you have a smaller vessel above it. So if you go above the rim, so then when you pour that larger amount, that's slight, because it goes above the rim, into the larger vessels, you won't lose any drops of it because your larger vessel has a wider base, so you could pour all of it over it, and there won't be any, even though some may come down the edge of the vessel, you're not going to lose any of the drops of the liquid in your smaller vessel. And so as a result, you're going to be able to move if you want to measure if you want to go from, for example, the quarter log, the revius, into the half a log, so you're going to fill up the quarter log twice. And so you fill it up once over the rim, and you're not going to lose any of it when you pour it into the half a log. And then you're going to do that again, and that will tell you how big your utensil needs to be because you need to be able to fill it up twice, and you'll do the same thing over and over again. And so as a result, you'll be able to be sure that you're always getting the right size so that the stuff at the top is so that when you fill up the one below with the proper number of times of the smaller measurement, you're again going to be above the rim. And so as a result, Rabbi Yehuda would say that even that over the rim stuff is kodesh. Uravias Yahivle Rachmana Moshe. And so Moshe gave the quarter log measurement. V'amrle Shar Deka Aili Lahu Birutse. And so as a result, use that over brim amounts, meaning pour up to that amount, and now use that to create the other measurements. Lamanda Amar Mimala Lamata, but the one who says that you go from the largest to the smallest, namely Rebbe Meir, Kasavar Beirutse Midos Lonis Kachu. You would say that the stuff that goes above the rim is not holy. Vihin Yahivle Rachmana Moshe. And Hashem told Moshe the hin size and use the hin to measure. And how do I know that it can't be that the hin that was measured had above the rim material? Because if you did have above the rim material, as soon as you tilted it even the littlest bit, you would lose some and you wouldn't necessarily be able to catch it all. And so as a result, you wouldn't be able to sort of confirm that, for example, you would have two half hin utensils, and the point of determining the right size of them is you would use Moshe would use the hin that God gave to him, and he'd pour some into the two vessels and make sure that he was able to fill the both of them and have nothing left in his hin measurement, and then he would know that the hin is that his half hin sized vessels are properly measured. But if he had the hin over the rim, he would have lost some of it, and therefore his half hins would not be properly sized. Whereas if it just went to the very top of the rim without going over the edge, you would be able to do some of the tilting without losing any of the liquid inside. And so as a result, you would be able to more exactly make sure that you got two half hins or three third hins or four quarter hins from that hin measuring unit. Okay, so So Laman Damar and Malamata, Kasavar Beirut Midas Lonus Kachu. V'hin Yahev Leilu Rachmana Lamoshe. V'amr Le Shar Baha Dekan Nafki Berutzin. And so as a result, he would Hashem would have told Moshe, use this hin measurement. And so as a result, the over the brim stuff is going to fall away and is not going to be included in the measuring. So Abaye Amar, Abaye says that isn't. So again, that was the Rabbi Yochanan said that the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is about whether or not what's above the rim is sanctified or not. Rabbi says, no, that's not what it's about. To Kuliyama, really, everybody agrees. Beirut Amidos Ika Lamemer Niskachu, Ika Lamemer Lo Niskachu. You don't even have to say that the debate between them is whether or not it's sanctified. You could say they both agree that it's sanctified. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda could agree that it's sanctified. They could agree that it's not sanctified. What they're arguing about is what's the definition of filled. Manda Amar Milamalo Mata, the one who says that you go from the largest to the smallest, namely Rebbe Meir, Kasavar Milayim, Shalo Yechaser, Vishalo Yosir. It means exactly filled. It means that you look at it with a level and you see nothing above the rim. That's the definition of filled. Umanda Amar Mimata Milamala, Milayim Shalo Yechaser, Aval Yoser Milayim Karina Bay. Look, whereas if you go from the smallest to the largest, then you're going to say, look, filled, yes, it is filled if you go exactly to the rim. But what if you go above the rim and you have a little bit above the rim that you could see from the edge is above the rim? Is that still considered filled? And according to Rabbi Yehuda, yes, it's still considered filled. So the argument is just whether if it's above the rim, is that still considered a filled amount, and therefore you're filling whatever requirement is because you did a filled amount, or is that considered too much and therefore you're not successful? So essentially, Rabbi Yehuda would give some degree of flexibility. You always need to go at least to the level amount, but if you go a little bit more, it's still considered filled. Whereas Rabbi Meir would say, no, as soon as you go above the rim, it's too much, and if you're below the rim, it's too little. It has to be very precise. Okay, Amar Mar, so now quoting the next piece of the brisa that we cited, Rabbi Shimon Omer lo sham hin. And of course, this also was said in our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon said that there was no hin measurement in the Beis Hamikdash. Shaper ka'amar lahu Rabbi Shimon l'Rabbanan. It seems like he's got a good point. So why was there a hin measurement? The Rabbanan. So what would the rabbi say? Haba hin to Avid Moshe l'shemen hamishka. There was a hin. It was used for the anointing oil. Diksiv v'shemen zayis hin. This is a pasuk at the end of Shmot Perek Lamed pasuk Kaf Daled, that there was a hin of oil that was used to make the anointing oil for all of the vessels that were sanctified in the Beis Hamikdash. So Mar Savar Kevan Diladoros Lo Hava Tzarich. Since Rabbi Shimon says, well, you didn't need that for all generations, so why bother keeping it? So Lafi Shah of the Ignas, it was used by Moshe, and then it was put away, it was hidden. And whereas the rabbis say, no, once you had it, you had it. And so as a result, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir would say, no, it was always there. Okay, Amar Mar v'es mi avi tachtav. Right. So then Rabbi Shimon asked reflexively, what is he going to bring in the place of the hin? And so so the question is, lo sagya de lo ma'ayel? Well, 1 second. Why did he need to bring another one? Why add? So Kida Amar Ravina, it's like Ravina said, Gemire shte smichos b'tzibor. That the Torah learned that there are two situations where you have a smicha, meaning that the rabbis learned that there are two situations where there is smicha, where you need to rest one's hands on a korban that is offered in the Beis Hamikdash. So too, the rabbis had a tradition that there were 7 vessels in the Beis Hamikdash, 7 different measuring vessels in the Beis Hamikdash, 7 different sizes. And so as a result, that's why Rabbi Shimon felt the need to find one to replace it. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Shnasos Hayubahin. There were markings. It wasn't, in fact, seven different measuring cups. There was one measuring cup. The Leis Sheva Midos. But 1 second, doesn't he have that same tradition? No, Leis no, he didn't have that tradition. The Ibayas Or you could say, you know what? My Sheva Midos, what does it mean to have seven measuring cups? Seven measuring utensils? Sheva Midot. It means seven measurements on one utensil. That's all that it means. So as a result, that's going to be sufficient as well. Okay, so our next Mishnah is going to say, what did these various measurements do? So, Revius my haisa mishameshes. What did you do with the quarter log? Revius mayim limitzora. You first of all, you needed a revius of mayim when you slaughtered the birds for a mitzora and you put their blood in the water. It needed to be a quarter log of water that would be used. Uravius shemin lenazir. And similarly, when you needed the loaves of bread for the mincha offerings for a nazir, so that would also require a quarter log of oil. Chatzi log mehayesh mishamish. So those were the two uses for the quarter log. Chatzi log. How about a half log? Mahayim mishamish. What was that used for? Chatzi log mayim lesota. That would be the water that would be used to scrape the parsha of the sota into, and the sota would drink it. The chatzi log shemen letoda, and it would be used for the toda loaves because you need a half a log for those as well, for each of the different kinds of loaves. Uvelog hayamoded l'chol hamenachos, and you would need a half a log would be used for all 30 of the loaves of the matzah based loaves, the non-leavened loaves of the Toda offering. Uvalog hayamoded l'chol menachos, and you would use a log measurement for all the rest of the menachos offerings. Ba'afilu mincha shel shishim isaron, even a mincha that had 60 isaron of flour. Nosing la shishim log, and you would use 60 log. You would measure each of those lugin one at a time. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, no, afilu mincha shel shishim isaron ein lo ella luga. No, there was only one log for all 60 isaron of flour. Shneamar lemincha v'log shemen, because it said in connection. This is in connection with a poor mitzora. This is Vayikra Perek Yudalid Pasuk Kav Aleph. So I guess two parshios from now, or two or three parshios from now. So Mincha V'Log Shaman. No, two parshios from now. So after Shmini, then comes Tazria, and I think it's in Tazria. So they would say for the poor mitzorah, you would have the mincha would have a log of oil. So shisha lapar. So what about what it would be? You would need 6 lug or half a hin. That would be for the bull sacrifice. For arba, a third of a hin would be for the ayil, the 4 lug or a third of a hin. That would be for the ram. Ushlosha keves, and 3 lug or a quarter of a hin would be for the lamb. Shlosha umetza menorah, and you would use 3.5 log for the menorah. Chatzi log l'chol ner, and that would be a half log for each lamp. So the Gemara asks, Yosef Rabbi Kashile, Rabbi was sitting and he had this question. Revius lama nimshcha. Why do you need the revius log measuring utensil to have been nimshcha, to have been anointed? Meaning, why does it need to be a kli shares? Why does it need to be a sanctified kli in the Beis Hamikdash? Mitzora, if you're going to tell me, well, you'd use it for the mitzora water in the process, and therefore it needs to be sanctified in order to be used in that process. As we turn to Pechet Amabet, Chutzu, that process is not done in the base of Migdash. So you don't need to sanctify that water. The Inazir, and if you tell me, well, it's the quarter log of the Nazir, Lechem Nazir B'shchitas Ayilhum de Kaddish. How is the bread, how is the mincha offering of the Nazir sanctified? It's sanctified through the slaughtering of the ram. You don't need a holy vessel to sanctify anything beforehand. So Amrle Rabbi Chia answered, Shaba hayamodid lechavite kohen gadol. They would use the quarter log to measure the oil for the chavitin of the kohen gadol. Reviya shemen lekol chala v'chala, because you would need one quarter log for every different loaf. So Kari Alai, so Rebbe was so thrilled, and he said about that, May Eretz Mirchak Ish Atzasi, from a distant land, the man of my counsel, namely Rebbe Chia, who originally was in Babel and then came to Eretz Yisrael. So he is the counsel to Rebbe, even though he was Rebbe's student. So he was highlighting the fact that it was he enjoyed learning from Rebbe. Chatzi log. Now, same question with respect to the half a log. Mahayam Shamish. What was it done with it? So Yosef Rebbe the Kakashile. So Rebbe asked a similar question. Chatzi log, lama nimshach. Why was the half log sanctified as a klisha race? Sota, if you're going to tell me, well, so that the Sota woman, so the woman who's accused of being alone with a man and drinking the Sota waters, said she should drink something that was sanctified. Do we was the water non-sanctified that it would require sanctification? The Torah says, Mayim, the Torah says, Mayim Kedoshim Ksiv. It specifically says that you should take holy waters. And so as a result, the water was already sanctified because you took it from the kior, from the fountain in the, from the water source that was in the base of Migdash. So eat Toda, and if you tell me, okay, well, maybe it's for the half log of the Toda loaves. Lachme Toda b'shchitas Toda hudikachi. How did the Toda loaves get sanctified? They weren't sanctified through their being in a vessel. They were sanctified because when the Toda itself was slaughtered, the loaves became sanctified. So Amrle Rabbi Shimon Rebbe, so Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rebbe, tells his dad, Shabo hayu machalik chatzi log shemen l'kol ner v'ner. No, but you needed it because that's how you would measure out how much oil would go in every lamp of the menorah. And so again, Rebbe is thrilled with that. And so Amar Lo, Ner Yisrael Kachaya. This is how the light of the Israel, so it was. And so as a result, again, very thrilled with the answer that his son offered. Similar kind of situation. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rebbe, Ner Shekavsa. If you have a lamp that ran out of oil, I'm sorry, that went out. Not that it ran out of oil, but it went out. It blew out or whatever. It went out and it's in the base of Migdash. So not that this ever necessarily happened, but if it went out before it was supposed to. So nidashin hashemen nidashna hapsila. You would, because the oil, and it did so because the oil had become filled with ash or the wick had turned to ash. So Ketzad, what do you do? So Meitiva, you clean it out, the nosin bashemen, and then you put new oil in it, umadlika, and you light it because it's supposed to be lit, so you would relight it. So Yosef, Rabbi Zerika, v'kad mibayle. So Rabbi Zerika was wondering, kishehu nosin bashemen, kemida rishona o kamosha chasra. How much do you put in? Do you put in the amount that was pulled out because it went out, and so you're replacing it, or do you put in the original amount, meaning a half log? So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Pshita de Kamida Rishona. You definitely have to put in the original amount. Di Kama Shechasra, because if you put in a different amount, Minaya Dina Mai Chisar, how would you know how much? You would need to have a measuring vessel to fill in order to figure it out. And if you're going to tell me, okay, so just measure it. Im kain sheva midos nafish lehu midos tuva. You would need to have an infinite number of measuring cups because you would need to measure it precisely. It's not enough to sort of just mark it on the edge of the vessel, how much it went to. You would need an infinite number of vessels in order to make sure that you filled it up completely. So as a result, Kari Alei. So as a result, Rabbi Zerika was thrilled with the answer, and he said about Rabbi Yirmiyah, "V'hadracha Slach rechav al dvar emes va'anva tzedek. That with your splendor succeed and ride for the sake of truth and righteous humility. So this is a pasuk in Tehillim, Perek Mem Hey, pasuk Hey. So Itmar Nami, and in fact we know that this was Rabbi Yirmiyah's answer was in fact correct because Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, but Amri La, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi. So Ner Shekav. So if you have a candle that went out, all these people said, or one said or the other said, Nidashen Hashemen Nidash Nahapsila, because the oil became filled with ash or the wick turned to ash. Ketzadosa, what do? Metiva ba shemen kemida rishona umlika. You put in the amount that you had originally, namely a half log, and then you light it. Okay, Amar of Huna, Braid the Rav Yehuda, Amar of Sheshes, Ner Mikdash shall prakim have it. That the lamp in the Beit HaMikdash was actually of parts. Now Rashi Ksiv Yav says, yeah, not quite. Shel prakim, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up. Shel chuliot, it was like almost like a spine. It was with pieces. Lo shel chuliot mamish, but it doesn't mean separate pieces. Sheyulchan leporkan ulasalkam in a menorah, that you could actually remove it from the menorah. Ela sheyachol lekofafa, rather you could bend it over. Lamata ulazokfa bimkoma, and to put it back in its place. Ubelaz plyri. So maybe some kind of pliable or something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure what the old French is, but in any event, the bottom line is that it was flexible. So kasavar kiksiv kikar umiksha aminor v'neirosaksiv. And when Rav Shesh's statement, the fact that it was flexible, must be that when we said that that there was a kikar of gold, and it was miksha, it was all hammered out of one piece, that included both the menorah itself and the lamps, the part that held the oil. Kavan demi boy hatava. Now, but since it needed to be cleaned out, ilav de prakim, if you didn't have that flexibility, ilav de prakim havi, if you didn't have that flexibility, lo havim, it would be harder to clean it out. So, Meisvei, 1 second, I'll ask you a question, because we have a brisa that tells us how we cleaned it out. And you know what? It says that the lamps were removed. Ketzaro, so what would you do? Misal Khan, you would remove the lamps, the tops of the menorah, umenichem ba'ohel, and you'd bring them into the tent you'd leave them in the kodesh, umaknechan besvog, and you'd wipe them with a sponge, v'nosim behen shemen umalikan, and then you put oil in them and you'd light them, and everything would be great, and you put them back on the menorah. So that clearly shows that that's different from Rav Shesh's. So who the Amar Rav Shesh's would say ki haitana? He agrees with a different opinion. Titania chachamim omrim lo haya mizizin osa mimkoma, that you would not, in fact, remove the any aspect of the lamp from its place because presumably it could not be moved. But once again, miklal de ibayle lo ozoza matzi mezizlai. This brisa actually supports the contradiction of Rav Shesh's. It supports the other brisa, because just as the other brisa says you could remove them, this says you don't remove them, but also it implies that you could remove them. So it supports it seems to contradict Rav Shesh's as well. Ela ema lo haisa zazam mimikoma. Rather, no, it says that the lamp could not or would not move from its place, meaning that you didn't have the ability to remove it. So that's how you should read that brisa. And so as a result, Rav Shesh's would agree with that brisa that there wasn't been ability. Uman chachamim, who are the authors of these brisas, or the brisa? Rabbi Lazar, who is Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Tzadok. The Tanya, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Tzadok, Omer. What did Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Tzadok, say? Kamin tas shel zahav hayala al gaba. There was a golden plate on top of each lamp. Keshehu mitiva. When the lamp would be cleaned out, dokaku klape pia. You would move that plate towards the mouth so that you could clear out the place where you poured the oil into. Keshehu nosein ba shemen. Dochako klape rosha, and then you would put the after you put the oil into it, you would cover that opening with the plate. And so as a result, based on this, the lamp would never be removed. And so as a result, the brisa that we just said of the Chachamim Omrim Lo Hayu Mezizin Otam Mimikoma is Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Tzadok. And so that's who that is. Uplukta Dahani Tanai. And that this machlokes is the same as the following machlokes of Tanaim. The Tanya, we have a brisa, menorah v'nei roseha baos minakikar. That again, we had the menorah and its lamps would all come from the one first from the measurement of a kikar. Ve'ein milkacheha umachtoseh min kikar. But that measurement of one piece of gold would not include the tongs and the scoops that would be used to clean out the even though they would be made out of gold, you wouldn't need to make them out of the same piece of raw piece of metal. Rabbi Nechemia says no. Menorah haisaba min kikar. The menorah, only the menorah would come from the kikar. V'lo ne'roseha umalkacheha umaktoseha baos min kikar. But the lamps, the tops of each of the uh, 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 arms of the menorah, they would not be from the same piece. They would be separate. And same with the tongs and the scoops. So, b'mai kamifli, what is the argument about as to whether or not the lamps were part of the menorah permanently or could be separated from them? B'hai kra. They're arguing about the following verse. Titania. Kikar Zahav Tahor Yasauta. The Torah says in Shmot Perek Hey Pasuk Lamitet that you should make it from a kikar of pure gold. So Lamadnu Lemenorah Shaba Min a kikar. Clearly, the menorah has to come from the kikar. Minayin Larabos Neroseha. How do I know that this is supposed to also include the lamps? So Talmud Lomar as Kol HaKelim Ha'ela. All the utensils are with it. Again, that's two psukim earlier. That's pasuk Lamed Zayin, which says Va'asiza es nerosa shiva v'he'ela es nerosa ve'ir al aver paneh umal kacheh umaktosa zahav tahor. So again, the point is that it says as kol. I'm sorry, that's not the right uh, verse. Hold on just a second. Um, uh, uh, I'm sorry. This is also from Perek Kav Hey Pasuk Kav Tet. Kikar Zahav Tahor Yaseh Ota Es Kol HaKelim Ha'ela. Meaning the end of that verse says that you're supposed to do all these utensils. And those utensils that we're referring to are back in Pasuk Lamed Zayin where it says Ves Roseha. So that's that. So therefore, the Neroseha are supposed to be made from the same kikar, from the same piece of metal. So it's all hammered out of one piece of metal. Well, maybe I should then include the tongs and the scoops. After all, those are in Pasuk Lamed Chet, which we just referenced. And so maybe all the utensils need to be included in all being carved out of the same block. Talmud Lomar, that's why it says Osa. The Torah says Osa, that limits it. Divrei Rabbi Nechemia. So that's Rabbi Nechemia's view. So again, Rabbi Nechemia is the view that specifically says that it all comes, the menorah and the a second. But now we're going to ask the question. Kasha to Rabbi Nechemia, ad Rabbi Nechemia. 1 second. You just cited Rabbi Nechemia for saying that the menorah and the lamps all come from the kikar, but the previous brisa said, Rabbi Nechemia said, the menorah haisaba min a kikar, v'lo neroseh, but not the lamps. So which one is it? So Trey Tanai Valiba de Rabbi Nechemia. Now it's two different opinions of Tanaim who disagreed about what Rabbi Nechemia said. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer, and now Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha gives the other opinion that says that the menorah comes from the kikar, but not the nerosah. Menorah ba min kikar, ve'ein makachav machnosah v'nerosah baos min kikar, but nothing else. The Ella mani mekayim es kol kelim ha'ela. Well, 1 second. The pasuk said in again Perek Kav Hey Pasuk Lamitet said Kikar Zahav Tahor Yaseuta, that you should make the gold menorah out of a kikar of zahav of gold as kol hakelim ha'ela, and all of these vessels too. So doesn't that show that all the vessels need to be made with it? So no, shahayu kalim shel zahav. No, it just means that the kalim have to be made out of gold, not that they come from the same kikar. Zahav behedrik siva. One second though, the previous verses referenced the fact that they need to be made out of gold directly. Vasisa as nerosah shiva vehela as nerosah veheir al aver paneha umakocha umakdosah zahav tahor. At the end of the pasuk that talks about the scoops and the tongs and the scoops, that in itself references the fact that they need to be made of gold. So you don't need the reference to as kol keleha to tell us that it needs to be made out of gold. No, lo nitzrucha el lefine road. Now, what? Why do we need to tell you about the other things that need to be made out of gold? It's specifically about the mouth of the lamps, where you would have the wick there to and it would be lit. So there would be fire right there. Because Salkatay I might have thought that because the mouth of the lamp is going to be blackened, the Torah will be worried about the money of the Jewish people, and as a result, won't want to use gold in that situation. So the answer is, as we turn to the top of Pei Tet Amud Aleph, V'le'avad zahav kol dehu. So maybe and so maybe you should only make that part not gold. So meaning make that part only the good part, and so as a result, he can make anything else to make it out of something else for the mouth there. So Kamash Malan comes to teach us, no, even the mouth needs to be made out of gold. All right, so we're up to the two dots at the top of Pei Tet Amud Aleph, and we'll pick up from there and talk about other measurements and what they're used for, God willing, when we learn together on Friday after Yontif. Have a Chag Sameach. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.